Well, it is 7 o'clock, and I am sure we'll be joined by some others, but we're going to go ahead and start. I welcome you all to this program. We're glad you're here. Good evening, and welcome to session 3 of our 3-part series, Beyond Affordability, Navigating Housing Injustice. Tonight's program is the third of a series, and it's titled Report Card and Action Items: What Can Be Done Statewide, Short-Term and Long-Term. This program is produced by Justice Advocates in the Roanoke and New River Valleys. We are a nonpartisan, faith-based, and issue-focused organization from various traditions that share a calling to raise our collective voices for justice, compassion, and transformation in our communities, our nation, and our world. I would like to read to you our mission statement, which is on our website. Our mission statement is to change lives by listening to and hearing the concerns of the marginalized, raising community awareness for inclusion and equity in our institutions, creating opportunities to engage in advocacy for change, and offering ourselves and our resources in the cause of justice. The Justice Advocates are, shown on your screen, Mark Benson, a member of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Blacksburg; Ruth Green, a member of the Blacksburg Jewish Community Center; Nancy Morris, a retired Presbyterian pastor in Roanoke; Melanie Smith, a member of the Blacksburg Presbyterian Church; me, Jenny Waring, a member of Central Church of the Brethren in Roanoke; and John Green, who is not with us this evening. He is a deacon for the Episcopal Diocese of Southwestern Virginia and lives in Blacksburg. Positive change is going to take all of us working together. We sincerely hope that you will join us in our work, and importantly, let us know what you are working on so we can support your work. Together, we can create a more just and compassionate world. We are hoping this session will generate lots of questions, and there are 3 ways to ask questions. You can type your question in the chat box. You can find the chat box by moving your cursor to the bottom of the screen near the center. You can raise your hand during question and answer session. You can move your cursor toward the bottom of the page and you will find the raise your hand function, or you can just raise your hand. We'll try to watch out for that. We also request that you mute your microphone except when you are asking a question. You can find that control by moving your cursor to the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen. In a moment, I will be putting in the chat our website and our Facebook pages. Our website is justiceadvocates.net, easy to remember. We hope that you will check them out and click join us on the website and like us on the Facebook page. These sessions are being recorded and then posted on both of our website and our Facebook page. So if you missed sessions 1 and 2, you can go there and watch them. And now I would like to introduce my friend Ruth Green to provide an overview of tonight's program and the series.
The ongoing housing crisis is affecting many working people, but as is always the case, low-income people are affected to the greatest extent. We have reached out to housing experts both locally and across our state to understand more about the struggles of the most needy among us and to learn how the Virginia General Assembly, state and local agencies, and nonprofit private agencies are responding to this crisis. In session 1, 2 housing experts, Jonathan Knopf of Housing Forward Virginia and Mel Jones, Virginia Center for Housing Research, discuss the current state of affordable housing nationally and statewide and the historical basis for the situation that the country now finds itself in. They focused especially on the consequence of increasing housing costs for low-income renters seeking a safe place to raise their families. Our speakers provided data about the demographics of this low-income population with respect to age, ethnicity, ability, and their employment status. In session 2, we heard from 2 very accomplished locally based fighters for housing justice, one from Virginia Organizing and one from Community Housing Partners. They both, those are both statewide, but they are locally based. And they talked to us about some recent case histories and the efforts of one nonprofit to alleviate the suffering. And tonight we have with us Isabel McLain, who will bring us up to date on what happened in the 2024 General Assembly with respect to housing bills. And most importantly, we want to learn how we can help. So Isabel's now there. That's good. There she is. She's the young woman with the pretty glasses. Throughout Isabel's, I must say, as a retired faculty member, looking at Isabel's CV, I was so impressed with the fact that she has known since she was an undergraduate what she wanted to do. This is not common. So I applaud her for that. And she's done very well with that. She's been driven by her strong conviction that housing is a human right. Currently, she's the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Virginia Housing Alliance, which is an advocacy organization based in Richmond, a good place to nag the governor. Prior to this position, she was the Research and Policy Analyst for Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia. People kept talking to me about home, and now I actually have in front of me what it stands for. That's good. So HOME is a statewide nonprofit that was born out of the necessity to enforce the Fair Housing Act. And its mission is to ensure equal access to housing for all people through fair housing investigations and other methods. And this is something which is very urgent and very difficult to enforce, as I understand it. Her work involves collaborating with community members, partner organizations, and lawmakers to advocate for evidence-based policies that advance fair housing in Virginia. Something that will interest my friends on our planning committee. She also focuses on reparation solutions to address historical and current housing practices that affect individuals due to their ethnicity, national origin, religion, family status, how old they are, sexual orientation, and source of income. She has in academia, we always talked about an undergraduate degree as your first degree, which sounds really terrible, but her first degree is from Davidson College. And then she got a master's in social work from the University of Maryland with a concentration on community action and social policy. So she's always worked for housing and frequently also for children affected by housing problems and also the homeless. So we're very excited she's here tonight to bring us up to date on what happened with housing bills in the Virginia General Assembly. So the floor is yours, Isabel.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Ruth, for that excellent and detailed introduction. I really appreciate that. I am going to share my screen. Alrighty, I believe that worked.
It did.
Good. Did. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and so honored to be invited to speak in your incredible housing series. I did end up having some time to watch the first session and learned a good bit and just really appreciate what y'all are doing with this series. So glad I can come in and be the grand finale. So as Ruth said, my name is Isabel McLain. I'm currently the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Virginia Housing Alliance, or VHA for short. And to provide a little bit more detail about what VHA does, just to kind of help explain my perspective as I'm explaining these housing bills. We are statewide. We focus primarily on state and federal advocacy, specifically related to increasing access to affordable housing and addressing homelessness. In a lot of ways, we work with and on behalf of housing nonprofits across the state, as well as the folks that they work with. So our focus is very broad related to affordable housing and homelessness. We do get specific at times, but I do think that is an important kind of lens to share with you all, so you can kind of understand that we try to have our fingers in everything, but we're not necessarily the lead in everything, but we do have a very broad focus. So tonight, I'm excited to share about our most recent work at the state level during the 2024 General Assembly. I'm going to dive into several different housing-related bills and budget items that were introduced this session, mostly focusing on those that are still on the table, those that passed out of the House and the Senate and are on their way to the governor for consideration. And I'm also going to try to highlight and have a special focus on bills that are specifically related to localities or giving localities more authority to address housing issues, because I know that you all are especially interested in hearing about opportunities to advocate at the local level and opportunities to kind of apply this in the Roanoke and New River valleys. So I'm going to wrap up at the end with those next steps and action items. And I would love for this part to be a bit like a conversation. I would also like to hear from you all, if there's any items that you're particularly interested in. And of course, there'll be time for questions too. So if you all want more detail about something that I mentioned, because of course, we have limited time, so I can't go into detail about every housing related bill that was on the table at all this session, but would be more than happy to answer questions and also hear from you all about what you're interested in and about maybe potential actions that you're already taking or planning to take. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So before I dive into the details about the bills, I did want to provide a little bit of context about where we are in the legislative process. Many of you may already be aware of this, and so I apologize for sharing information you may already know, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because it can be complicated. It's not our whole legislative process is not necessarily something that's easy to follow and that always makes sense. In Virginia, we have our state legislative session starting in early January. And depending on which year it is, we alternate years that we work on our state budget. So depending on if it's a budget year or not, that impacts the length of the legislative session. So this year we are in a budget year, so we have a longer session. And so we just ended the legislative session this past Saturday, March 9th. You may think, wow, that's a very short amount of time for a legislative session, and it is. But jam-packed with lots of things. So that's where we are right now. The legislative session has officially adjourned, but the bills that are still on the table still have quite a way to go before they are officially, before they can be effective and become laws. So right now, we are waiting for the governor to respond and take action on the bills that legislators have passed through both chambers and sent to him. He has until April 8th to take those actions. Those options could be he can sign a bill to become a law, he can amend a bill, he can veto a bill, and he can also just let a bill pass without his signature. After he's taken action, there is what is called a reconvene session on April 17th, and all the legislators will come back for a day and they'll respond to the governor's action. So if he amended a bill, they will consider those amendments and vote on that changed bill. And if they had a veto-proof majority, they could potentially try to override a veto. as well. That's also when hopefully the budget is finished and they're all able to also consider the amendments and vetoes that the governor may have for aspects of the budget and vote on that. However, sometimes it doesn't quite work that way, and they might need more time to negotiate a budget. At least we needed a lot more time last year and the year before. So I did have on here that the governor can call a special session at any time to have the legislators come back, to be able to vote on a budget if they needed more time, or some other issue comes up. But after all of that process, any bills that are still there, have received the governor's response, and they're still active, they will actually become effective on July 1st. So anything that I'm talking about today, know that there's a chance that it might not make it through the governor. We don't know how he will decide to act on those. And none of it will become effective until July 1st. So just wanted to make sure you all understand before I go into this, where we are right now. All right, so I'm going to start with 3 items related more generally to affordable housing. And these were 3 of our top priorities at BHA. We worked really hard and led advocacy efforts for these items. The first of which is related to our state housing trust fund, which, if you're not familiar with that, it is it's a fund that 80% of it goes as competitive loans to developers who are wanting to develop or rehabilitate affordable housing. And then 20% of it goes to homeless service providers and as grants for various projects, programs. They have a lot of flexibility in how they can use that funding. So it's a really great source for really important work. Currently, it is funded at $75 million a year. With the version of the budget right now that the governor is considering, they have included a $12.5 million increase each year. That would bring us to $87.5 million if that is in the final budget. To give you a little bit of context, we were really pushing for an additional $75 million to bring us to $150 million. So we didn't quite get what we were pushing for, but we will take any increase, and this will definitely have an impact. We know every year the Housing Trust Fund is oversubscribed. More people apply for it and try to use it, vastly more than are able to. And so hopefully this will be able to support more projects. The next item on here is Senate Bill 597. It was introduced by Senator McPike. And this one, essentially, it is giving localities more tools to encourage the development of affordable housing. More specifically, it gives all localities across Virginia the authority to design and implement affordable dwelling unit ordinances or inclusionary zoning programs as they see fit based on the needs of their jurisdiction, with that flexibility to implement it how they choose. Inclusionary zoning programs, if you're not familiar, essentially this is a program that asks developers or requires developers to include a certain number of affordable units in any new market rate residential development in exchange for certain incentives to offset the cost of having affordable units. So that could be things like density bonuses, expedited permitting process, exemption from certain fees. There's a lot of different things, and we don't need to go into all of that. But there's a lot of things that localities can do to try to cut costs for a developer and encourage them to include affordable units in any development. Right now, only 7 localities have the ability, the authority to totally design this how they see fit and to make it mandatory. Whereas the rest of the localities have to follow a very heavily prescribed kind of method for how to do this, which it doesn't have a lot of flexibility and honestly hasn't really been possible. So the only localities that really have used this are the ones that had the flexibility. So what this bill does is it gives everyone that flexibility. Basically saying, if you want to, you should be able to do this how you choose. So we know that inclusionary zoning has been really effective in different, there's many great examples of it across the nation and also in Virginia. Charlottesville is one locality that has this authority already, as well as Fairfax, great examples of inclusionary zoning. The next bill on here, House Bill 1398, introduced by Delegate Bennett Parker. Instead of focusing on the development of affordable housing, this one focuses on preserving what affordable housing we do have right now. Because if we're going to make progress on addressing the affordable housing crisis, we also have to hold on to what we do have and make sure that we're not seeing units going out the door at the same time as we're trying to build new ones. And specifically, this bill, it again is another enabling bill for localities. It gives them the authority to establish what's called a right of first refusal during the sale of publicly supported, so that's like state or federally subsidized multifamily properties that are at risk of expiring affordability. So those that are at the end of their period of affordability restrictions, and there's no plans in place to renew those affordability restrictions. So there's a high chance that those units will exit our stock of affordable housing. So how this works and how we're defining a right of first refusal in this bill is essentially a locality matching a third-party offer. So say I'm an owner of an eligible property. We're nearing the end of our affordability restrictions, and I have no plans in place to extend those. And I want to sell it. So I've accepted a third-party offer from someone else who's going to buy it. And they also don't have plans to extend the affordability. If that's the case, I have to let the locality know. And the locality has a certain amount of time to decide if they are going to match that third-party offer, which is essentially exercising their right of first refusal. And then I have to sell it to them. But because it's, they're just matching the third-party offer, as an owner, I'm essentially having the same deal as I would with this third-party offer, but instead this property is going to this locality or a partner that the locality is working with. So it could be a nonprofit or housing authority, or, they have a lot of options for who they could work with. But it's going instead to an entity that will ensure that those units stay affordable. So really great tool that we're hoping that this continues through and that localities are able to use that. There are also several items related to manufactured homes or mobile homes. And I wanted to make sure I included this, because I believe Ruth told me that y'all were interested in this topic as well. The first one of these, the first bill, House Bill 1397, which is introduced by Delegate Krizik. It's a little bit complicated. It's a very big bill and includes a lot, but because I already explained right of first refusal for the affordable housing bill, hopefully this one is a little bit more straightforward. It includes an aspect that gives localities the same right of first refusal during the sale of manufactured home parks as well. However, unfortunately, it treats it as a pilot, and so only localities in Planning District 8, which is in Northern Virginia, are able to exercise this right now. That was not the initial plan in the beginning when we were working on this and other partners were working on this, but it ended up being an amendment in the end that was necessary to get this passed. So kind of treating it as a pilot. However, the rest of the bill applies to all of Virginia, and there are important parts to it. Firstly, it increases the relocation expenses that an owner has to provide to residents if those residents are forced to move due to a redevelopment. So if the manufactured home park is going to be redeveloped, no longer have manufactured homes there, the owner has to provide now $5,000 in relocation expenses to each resident without strings attached. So that's really huge and very exciting because despite the misnomer of mobile homes, these homes are not mobile often. And so if you're being told that you can no longer have your home on this land anymore, it's very costly to remove homes if you even can. So sometimes this money would be used to try to move that home or start over because it's really hard to move a home. And then there's another part of this bill that gives resident associations a better chance, a better opportunity to purchase a park if they wanted to. So it doesn't give them a right of first refusal, but it gives them an extended notice period. So if an owner accepts a third-party offer, they have more time before that can move through the process. The resident associations can respond with a competing offer if they want to. And it also requires that owners negotiate in good faith with resident associations. And there's more accountability specifically for how to ensure that that good faith is happening, which is a really important piece as well. So exciting bill that covers quite a bit in there. There's another bill, House Bill 572 or Senate Bill 232, introduced by Delegate Delaney and Senator Hashmi. This one is specifically related. It's focusing on tenant protections in the Manufactured Home Lot Rental Act. Essentially, what it's doing is bringing it more in line with Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act. There were a couple rights that tenants have under that act that weren't translated to the MHRLA. For example, the right to redemption, which is something that tenants can do. It's essentially saying that up to 48 hours before a sheriff comes to evict you, if you can pay off all that you owe at that point, you're stopping the eviction. So that's kind of the right of redemption, which technically the residents at manufactured homeowners should have that already, but it wasn't explicitly included. And so there was some confusion about that. So this is a really important bill to just ensure, really spell out what rights they have and dispel some of that confusion. And then lastly, we have a budget item, kind of exciting. It's a pilot program, setting aside some money for what we're calling the Mobile Home Revolving Loan Fund. It is just for 1 year. So usually budgets are 2 years, but this is just for the first year of the budget for right now. Basically, this is money loans that could low or no interest loans that could go to nonprofits or tenant associations or tenants if they are trying to acquire like a park or acquire the land on which their homes reside. So this could potentially be used for things, with the greater opportunity to purchase that the other bill grants manufactured home park residents. So exciting, and hoping that stays in the budget as well, so that we can at least start a program and then build from there. It's so much easier to build out than start a whole new program. So, alrighty. I think I need to move faster. I may be talking too much. All right, so there's a couple of the items here related to housing instability and homelessness that I wanted to touch on. The first one is it's a new fund kind of separating money that the state gives towards homeless assistance and homeless prevention services, but specifically setting aside an additional piece of that money that goes just towards capacity funding for our continuum of care lead agencies, which these are the agencies that coordinate homeless services at the regional level and coordinate that funding. They do a lot of work, and they're serving more people today than they ever have with the same resources that they have. And it's been tough, especially after losing some of the extra funds they had during COVID. So this is really important. It is only $675,000 a year for 27 lead agencies, but we are taking what we can get. And the next is also kind of a small increase, but in Virginia, we have an eviction reduction program. It is not statewide, but specifically, it's kind of a competitive grant process that is available statewide, but different organizations who serve their localities kind of apply to be the administrators of this fund that kind of is a last defense against eviction. If someone has an eviction notice, they have a court date, and they're getting to that point, this program can step in and try to cover the rent that they owe and prevent that eviction. So this includes a small increase to that, which, again, we'll take what we can get. The last thing, I wanted to include this in here because this is a really important initiative that a lot of housing advocates are working on, and that we will continue to work on. So you will hear from us about this for years to come until this actually happens, which maybe that will be next year. I don't know. But essentially, we're calling this the 5,000 Families Program. It was trying to establish a pilot that would provide state-funded ongoing rental assistance to very low-income families with school-age children. So it was starting out as a pilot for this very targeted population, but our dream is to someday have a robust state-funded rental assistance program that we can use that supplements other forms of rental assistance that the federal government funds and gives Virginia some control to make that more flexible here. So that's a really big priority of the AHA's. And I wanted to include that here, but unfortunately it was not included in the budget this year. So we will have to keep working on it. There is also an exciting new pilot program related to homeownership. The various Habitat for Humanity chapters were the ones taking the lead on this, but essentially it is again a one-year pilot. So same as the Manufactured Home Revolving Loan Fund, but it's basically a very deep down payment assistance program that is trying to provide homeownership opportunities for folks that make less than 60% of the area median income. So that's a very deeply affordable homeownership opportunity for folks that otherwise would not consider homeownership at all, at least at that time. So exciting as well for that, to see where that goes. And then there were two items related to what we refer to as community-based housing or permanent supportive housing. Specifically, these are two programs that are administered by the Department of Behavioral Health and Disability Services that provide housing opportunities in the community where people with disabilities can choose where they want to live, trying to kind of push back against over-institutionalization of people with disabilities and really provide some resources so that they can live wherever they want to with the supports that they need. So the first program is called the Permanent Supportive Housing Program. It provides rental assistance and supportive services to adults with serious mental illnesses, with a specific priority for those that are leaving psychiatric hospitals or those experiencing chronic homelessness. And they included $3 million extra for that, which we're really excited about. That is, I can't remember off the top of my head how much it's funded currently. I believe it's considerable. I think it's at 80-something thousand, or 80 million, sorry. So this is a small-ish increase, but again, we'll take whatever increase we can get. And then secondly, there's what's called the State Rental Assistance Program that DBHDS administers, and this is just rental assistance for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And again, a small increase, but an important increase there. All right, I'm going to end my spiel before I move on to kind of more of the action items and next steps. With probably the biggest chunk of housing housing bills, but it's almost too much for me to include in here, and I don't have 2 hours of your time tonight, so I wanted to do a brief overview of several bills related to tenant rights that are really important. I put in here kind of a couple different or several different topics. There were bills related to transparency in the rental application process, transparency about how fees are charged and what fees are for, trying to reduce junk fees. So, lots of stuff get added to the bill, added to, a tenant's, bill when they, should just be kind of a part of the monthly rent, and they shouldn't be paying for separate fees for maintenance or things like that. There are some really important bills related to criminal background screening, specifically to touch on some of the fair housing piece that Ruth talked about in the beginning that home focuses on. It would require all affordable housing providers to follow a model criminal background screening policy that aligns with guidance from the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal government with how to do that. And it's pretty common sense stuff that you would think, like, not considering anything that's not a felony, that there's a certain look back period, that we're not looking back 20 years and saying, okay, that means we shouldn't rent to them. There are some very common sense restrictions to that. And the affordable housing providers that we work with, very excited about that, and try to already use those policies anyways. A very good bill that we're hoping again becomes law. There are bills related to expunging eviction records, which is really important because going through an eviction and that staying on your record will impact your ability to get housing moving forward when it really shouldn't. Things related to habitability concerns, protection from retaliation from landlords. Some tenants, if they're organizing or speaking to the press about issues like habitability issues, sometimes landlords retaliate against them, and that's totally not okay. So there was a bill to really define what retaliatory behaviors are and how, so that it's easier to prove that. And then there were also attempts to allow localities, so again, another enabling locality bill, to create rental stabilization or anti-rent gouging ordinances. So those are ordinances that would restrict rent increases to a certain percentage. Often they restrict them to the consumer price index increase or plus a few percentage points. So usually if it's anti-rent gouging, it's trying to stop the really excessive increases, but not get to the point of full rent control. So that's what they're aiming for, but it did not pass this year. And then the other two bills on here that I wanted to highlight, the first one is really important. It empowers localities, cities, counties, and towns to be able to file suit themselves against landlords, or specifically slumlords, to be able to force compliance with health and safety standards, to be able to enforce building code issues and be a bit more proactive about that. Right now, that kind of the enforcement mechanisms for that rely on the tenant taking action against a landlord for habitability issues, or a building code inspector, taking action, potentially condemning a property, which is hard to do because that does mean that everyone then is displaced. So this gives another option, allowing localities to be able to negotiate and potentially, like with a judge, come up with a specific plan that the landlord has to follow to fix certain issues, to hopefully not have to condemn the building, but still actually address the very serious issues that tenants are experiencing. So that's a really important one. Unfortunately, the governor has already responded to this one. There were some bills that, because they were passed so earlier on in the session, because this is not a very controversial bill, a lot of Republicans voted for this. He had to respond to it by this past Friday. And unfortunately, he has amended it. He offered some amendments that would not make this go into effect until next year. And that it would essentially it instead asks DHCD to do a study. Anyway, it not very great. So we're disappointed in that, but trying to explore some options for what we can do in response to those amendments. So I did want to mention that, but also let you know that this one has unfortunately already started getting cut up. And then the last one here, this is a bill that would give tenants more time to catch up on rent before they actually have to face an eviction. So right now, under our current code, you don't pay rent for basically 5 days past the due date. That is when the landlord can serve you with an eviction notice, and basically take you to court for non-payment of rent. But if this new bill becomes law, you would actually have 14 days. So it's essentially giving you enough time to actually have another paycheck, to increase your ability to actually have a chance to pay that rent before having to go through the whole eviction process with a court. So that is another interesting one. If you want more information, because of course I did not have time to go through every housing related bill or go as much detail into them, we have a legislative tracker on Virginia Housing Alliance's website that has I would say almost all, most housing related bills, and kind of shows what the last action was, where they are, and links that you can learn more about them. So in the last 5 minutes I have before we go to questions, what can we do from here? Basically, as I was going along, I was trying to kind of highlight that there are several bills that I think on the local level present a lot of opportunity for advocacy. So if, say, of course, pending governor actions, if these do become law, there's only so much the state can do by saying, you have the ability to do this. There's got to be work to actually get different localities to take advantage of that and actually use that authority, which can be a really big push and require a lot of advocacy. So that's going to be something that we're trying to focus on a little bit more and expand our capacity to engage more at the local level. But especially for you all, I think that these are some really great opportunities to organize and advocate around. So in particular, the inclusionary zoning program I mentioned earlier, if all localities are able to use that as flexibly as they would like to choose, and make those as effective as possible, we really want as many to take advantage of that makes sense. It doesn't make sense for every single locality to have inclusionary zoning, but it would benefit a lot. And then, of course, also the right of first refusal for affordable housing preservation as well. We really want localities to take advantage of this. And this is a new thing. This has not been introduced before. And I think it's not something that is as much of a priority as it should be. So we at VHA are going to be doing quite a bit of public education around this, and we encourage others as well, and kind of make sure that localities know that this is an option and why preservation is important. So a very key place there. And then also actions to try to hold slumlords accountable through legal action at the local level, pushing localities to step in so that it doesn't just fall on tenants to be able to hold their landlords accountable. And then I did mention here, I know that the Roanoke and New River Valleys are not in Planning District 8, so unfortunately the manufactured home park right of first refusal does not apply to you all, but hopefully soon. Fingers crossed we can come back in future years and expand that. And then on the state level, beyond just trying to push your local governments to take advantage of these things, because we are still in the process of waiting for the governor's response, we still have the reconvene session coming. There is still quite a lot of opportunities for advocacy. We don't know how the future, we don't really know how these bills are going to end up, and we obviously want all of these to become law. So we encourage you to write the governor. There are I have kind of a link I can put in the chat. There's a kind of a contact form on his website that I don't know how effective that is, if that gets to him. I'll put these in the chat after I stop sharing my screen, because that's a little bit hard for me to do that. But there's a way to contact him through there. I also think it's really powerful to organize like a sign-on letters or things of that nature to send to him too, to really kind of overwhelm, like, we're communicating with you, and these are all the organizations that support this as well, that can be communicated to him. You can also still write your legislators, even though right now it's technically out of their hands, but ensuring, telling them, like, hey, there's quite a few people in your district that really support this. Like, please hold the line during negotiations, especially if it's a budget item, because that's going to be really tense budget negotiations with the governor. Don't let this be something that goes on the chopping block. Or if there's any amendments to this bill, really try to push back on that. We really want this to become law. So there's a lot of opportunities to get them to also work with you and kind of advocate on your behalf there as well. And then in addition, I think because the governor is not the most accessible, I will say, to the layperson, and even to me as an advocate, it is very hard to communicate with his policy team, that sometimes it can be effective to kind of talk to him through talking with the press and talking with the public. So writing op-eds, or posting on social media, hosting a press conference, getting reporters to write about certain bills, which we've done a lot of work on. And there's a couple different articles that I can share with you all about some of these bills, but really trying to highlight it so that it stays on his radar and that he sees public pressure for some of these bills as well. And then lastly, you can sign up for VHA's newsletter and action alerts. We send out a monthly newsletter with updates about different advocacy opportunities. And then when there are kind of more immediate stuff, we send out a call to action, usually with kind of an example email, some talking points in there for you to be able to reach out to your legislators. So again, I'll put the links to that in the chat too, now that I am finished. So thank you all so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can take questions and talk a little bit more about those action items. So quickly, before I forget, I'm going to put the links that I said I would put in the chat. Here we go. This is the link to the governor's page. There's a kind of a contact form for him. And then these are two links. One is to sign up for our VHA's newsletter, and the other is to sign up for our action alerts.
Thank you, Rebecca, for a quick overview of very complicated issues. We appreciate the effort and all the work that goes behind the scene in making these changes. We are now open for questions and answers. There is a question in the chat, but Ruth has her hand raised, so I'm going to let her go first.
Okay, so you may know that Virginia Organizing across the state is focusing on housing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And our local chapter is trying to push for a home repair fund administered by some entity of Montgomery County, where, and it ties in, it seems to me, with HB 597 with suing the landlord if the place is dangerous. So I got lost a little in what you said next. I think you said that Youngkin is messing around with this, but he hasn't said no yet. Is that correct?
Yes, I could go into a little bit more detail about that. Essentially what he's done is he's delayed the enactment of this. So he basically said that this bill will not become effective unless it's also passed by the General Assembly next year too. So it's delaying it. And he also said that in the meantime, he's directing the Department of Community and Housing and Community Development to do a study looking at all of the recent changes to the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act of the past like 5 years, and studying how those have impacted the supply of affordable housing, which does not excite me. I think that is based on this assumption that additional tenant protections reduce our supply of affordable housing or make it harder to produce affordable housing. And that is not a dichotomy that we should accept. We need affordable housing that is habitable. We need affordable housing that tenants can actually stay in, that they're not going to be evicted from very easily. We need it that they can actually access it, and that they're being fairly screened for rental applications for that affordable housing. So disappointed by that amendment. We will see how we go from there, but I'm pretty sure that the patrons are going to reject those amendments. And so at that point, the governor will decide if he wants to veto the bill without his amendments or not. And it's likely that he will veto it without his amendments. I mean, of course, things could change, and we don't know that for sure. But that is where we are with that bill, unfortunately.
So I had two other questions. One is, at Virginia Organizing, we've been working on this quite hard for quite a while now. And sometimes I think when the term affordable housing is mentioned, it means home ownership. And the class of people that live in manufactured home parks mostly owning a home would be a dream. But the way you're using it, it's for any housing, right?
Yes. When I use the term affordable housing, I am most often meaning housing that is either subsidized, so they've received state or federal assistance, and so they have affordability requirements in response to that. Or there are other forms of requirements, like, for example, the inclusionary zoning programs I talked about, where they're asking for certain units of affordable, or a certain number of affordable units. Those don't necessarily would come with, like, say, money from the trust fund.
Right.
So they wouldn't necessarily be subsidized, but it's based on income level. So we would want those. Again, you can define affordability in a lot of different ways, how deep you want it to be, but usually when I'm talking about affordable housing, I am talking about housing that is affordable to those at 80% of the area median income or lower, more often even 60% of the area median income and lower, which is higher than most people think, I will say. Like the 80% AMI and lower, I would encourage you all to look what those limits are in your area, so you kind of have an idea about what that means. Because again, if we're just using terms for affordable housing, that's another industry term that doesn't really help us. So being able to look and see what that actually means, I mean, and that, you'd be surprised the amount of people that, teachers or emergency service providers, so many people are at that 80% AMI or lower. And so when we talk about affordable housing, I want to point out that it does cover quite a bit of our population, unfortunately, and that would qualify for that. So that is what I refer to. But I know that there's different ways to define it that I think Jonathan talked about in the first session of the series too, kind of about different definitions. But I know that it's very different when we're talking about renters to home ownership opportunities too. But like the down payment assistance program that pilot that we've got funding for, it is specifically affordable opportunities for those that make 60% area median income or lower, which for home ownership, that's very deep affordable housing. So it's all relative.
Okay, so then the other thing I wonder about in terms of there possibly being a law allowing localities to sue a landlord that isn't doing his job, that wouldn't incur expense by the tenant? The locality would be hiring the lawyer, yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
exactly.
Otherwise, yes.
Go ahead, sorry.
I just said otherwise it's impossible for that class of people with so little money.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why we support this bill, is because right now having the onus be on the tenant to take that action, hire a lawyer, take that time to really, and that effort to try to hold the landlord accountable is sometimes not possible.
Well, it just wouldn't be. And the power is so lopsided there that.
Yeah, exactly. So localities have a little bit more power. So hopefully if they are able to do that, that's definitely evens some of the playing field out.
Okay. Any other questions?
We have a comment or a question from Chris Chinham. We're pleased to have Chris with us tonight. This is his area in the city of Roanoke. And Chris, do you want to pose a question or maybe comment about how you see some of these legislative efforts impacting Roanoke?
Sure. Thank you, and appreciate the invite from Jenny to this. So this is and I went back and looked at least the first session. And so I'm interested in the inclusionary zoning provisions, and we're in our second phase of zoning reform, as we call it, and
Oh,
so
okay.
we're opening up our single family zones, and we hope to get approval Monday. If anybody wants to come to our city council meeting and advocate for it, I would love that. So the next phase we're looking at, and quite frankly, at the urging of one of our council members, is the inclusionary zoning provisions that are now opened up to all localities. I think we'd be really good with the voluntary version of things, and I'm looking for any leads that you might have on evidence that these things work, and what the outcomes are from those, and you can provide those offline if you want, but I'm really interested in that, and kind of understanding, do they work, and what do you have to do? Does a volunteer program work, or do you need to go mandatory with it?
Gotcha. Thank you so much for coming, and again, you offering an opportunity to advocate right away from Monday to go to the city council. So appreciate that. But yes, I can definitely share some resources, and very excited for the city of Roanoke as y'all are going through a zoning rewrite and considering this. That's amazing. So I can definitely send you some resources. And it does get kind of tricky because I think this is a tool that can be used ineffectively. So you do really want to make sure you're doing this correctly. I'd also point to Charlottesville as a really great example. They have gone through
Sure.
very long also zoning rewrite process and a lot of research on how to do this in their locality in a way that has involved a lot of stakeholders, and seems like it's going to be very effective. So I'll share some resources and potentially connect you with some experts, but put your email in the chat or something, and I'll try to
I
follow
will.
up.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Much.
Is the city council meeting at 2 or at 7?
Is it set? This one is because it's a public hearing. It's at 7 o'clock in the city council chambers, 215 Church Avenue. If you want a personalized, I will sit down with you to talk about what the details of this, but if you go to, and I don't want to make this a commercial or hijack this meeting or anything, but if you go to planroanoke.org/zoning, it'll tell you all about what's going on. And if you want a personal meeting with me or any of my staff, we will sit down with you and would love to talk about what we're doing, what we're up to.
Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions as we approach the 8 o'clock time? And please point out anything in the chat that I might be missing.
Does Eric Chapman want to talk about what he was posting in the chat?
Yeah, that would be good if he would do that.
I don't think y'all want to give me a second bite at the apple. I was just going to support what Isabel said. She's absolutely right and should be supported. But I mean, the term affordable housing is a little bit of a red herring. It's not a regulated term. I would define it as she did, as subsidized housing in one flavor or another, whether that is low-income housing tax credits, which you actually have to have an income to qualify from. That's what you think of as traditional rent control. The rent for a unit is capped at some average of the area median income, but you have to have income, right, to qualify for it. So you got to be working. That's your teachers, that's your emergency response professionals, that's your firefighters, your police officers, your support service staff and their families who are living in that housing. Traditional subsidized like Section 8, that's your housing choice voucher or public property-based voucher. Those are where the government pays for part of your tuition, or excuse me, your rent. I came from another event about scholarships. And then your USDA rural development programs, which again have an interesting mix of subsidizing developers to put in new apartments and also giving rental assistance to renters if their income in rural areas, which we're very rural area around here, country outside of the NRV or Giles or whatever, meet a certain income metric, and they will subsidize that part of your rent. That was what my comment was directed towards. I'd mentioned to Isabel in a private chat. She talks about advocating and the importance of localities being able to use their ability to condemn and to enforce habitability issues. So like the landlord attorney in me is going to say, hey, the locality can always enforce condemnation proceedings, and that's fine. But I don't think that's enough. Slumlords get by in barely livable units, which are awful places to live, floors falling through, roaches, sewage backing up, all sorts of nasty stuff. And most legal aid organizations, which are all my residents and probably a lot of her clients can afford, are by regulatory statute or by cost, as we mentioned earlier, absolutely unable to do multi-plaintiff, because remember, Virginia doesn't approve class actions. No such thing in Virginia. We're one of the few states in the union that doesn't allow class actions. They can't get representation. And if legal aid, the only people who can represent them, can't file multi-plaintiff actions because of workload or regulatory restriction, then they're screwed. The city can do it a lot better. And the city can lean on any developer. They can shut down the facility. They can do relocation. They can enforce habitability. That's a better route. And Governor Youngkin's, I'm not getting paid by her or anyone else. Ignore my little name tag that I can't wipe away that says Community Housing Partners. Governor Youngkin's proposal is bullshit. He's trying to stall. He's going to bury it in DHCD. The amendments that were made to the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act 55.1 et al. Was overhauled in 2020. They're huge. They're great. And they are this. You can't even see my fingers on the screen. They're this incrementally beneficial to tenants than they were 20 years ago. Terrifying thought. North Carolina, that red place below us of all the stuff, is so much more progressive when it comes to housing than Virginia has been in the past 30 years. The Veralta Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act, called Veralta, amendments did nothing to stem the tide of affordable housing, because 98% of the affordable housing like we run at Community Housing Partners is subsidized. And we have requirements that are so far beyond what the common law, what the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act already requires, that I laugh about it. I'm on those bills she's advocating for. 14-day pay or quit. You heard me ramble about it in the second session. Chris, I'm holding you out. If you didn't watch the recording of the second session, you missed my rambles. My rate. It hurts. Well, I just skip from 1 to 3, man. This ain't a book. You can't do it like that. Anyway, there's no recap. Point being, that's a dodge. That's just a dodge. It is. And localities should enforce. Roanoke should know as well as anyone. I'm not calling Chris out on that, but you got Spanky Macker up there. Someone should shut him down. We got other people in other cities I can name as well. These people are making humans live in subhuman conditions, and that sucks, frankly. Oh, Chris, also on the rest, I dropped an Urban Institute link into the chat, and also one from Shelter Force. They have differing empirical research provisions on the effective inclusionary zoning. As Isabel said, it can be done well. It can be done poorly. It hasn't been done long-term. So the verdict is out on how to do it, in which way, shape, or form. And I'm not here to advocate on one particular way, but I think it is a tool. Look to Alexandria, look to Arlington, Asheville, North Carolina. If you want to go to a really cool process for making people bring affordable housing into the city, they have a really cool model, a great office there. Developers are slow to coming to it because it's an added cost, but hell, I live in Blacksburg and you can't develop here if you had $1 billion. I'll shut up now. Thanks, y'all.
All right, Eric, we need to go to coffee.
I've been talking with Roanoke for a while now. We really want to build up there. We want to be in your all city, and it's nothing you're doing and nothing we're doing. It's interest rates now. We just can't connect the dots as easily as we wanted to. We had 2 tax credit apps in for you last year.
Yeah.
Great. By the way, I'm picking on Chris because he's a great person and he cares and he's advocating for all the right reasons. So that's my political pitch that I'm not allowed to do.
Good to see partnering and advocacy in action here. Appreciate that. Are there other questions before we go to our closing portion?
Isabel, we have heard from walking around Blacksburg and Christiansburg, and then reading in the paper this phenomenon of big corporations buying up mobile home parks and doing things that are really disastrous for the tenants there, especially the really low income tenants. And I've read in some newspaper account of some attempt being made to protect residents from this by enabling them to buy the property. Is that real, any of it, or is it just a fantasy?
You mean that the efforts to try to interfere
Yes.
with investors coming in?
Right.
Yes, it is very real. There's a lot of advocates that are working on that. And especially the bill that I mentioned that's complicated, that has a lot of different things in it. was essentially created to try to make some progress towards protecting parks from such kind of buyouts and instances of displacement. So we had came to that wanting to give localities the right of first refusal to intervene when parks are being sold to investors, that they could step in and match that offer, and then instead be the ones that purchase it or do it with a partner, like a housing nonprofit that could do it, or with the resident association. Unfortunately, that got limited to just Planning District 8. So not as much progress as we wanted.
Right,
And then as far as the purchase opportunity, we did make some progress. It's not a right of first refusal for residents. Unfortunately, that's definitely the most strong tool there. Or, more, actually more money to give to residents or nonprofits so they could match third-party offers, or that they could acquire these properties and actually compete with these big investment companies as well. So there's a lot more that needs to be done, but we did make some progress, and being able to lengthen that process out, giving a little bit more of an opportunity to purchase as residents, ensuring that and holding owners accountable that they have to negotiate in good faith with residents, and that they have 90 days instead of 60 days to respond when an owner receives an offer from a third party. And also increasing the relocation expenses. So if an investor is coming in and they're going to redevelop the property, they do have to pay tenants more money, or the owner. I think it actually is the buyer. I think I misspoke earlier. It would be the one who's purchasing that has to pay those relocation expenses. But often we know that investment entities are not necessarily redeveloping; they're just poorly managing manufactured home parks too. So there's a lot more work to be done, but we are kind of resurrecting a manufactured home park kind of coalition that has worked in the past, specifically around this, and going to be coming back with more efforts to try to protect these communities. So would love to, if you're interested in joining that coalition or want some more information, let me know.
Okay.
Isabel, we are also blessed with the presence of a city council member, Stephanie Moon Reynolds, who posted in the chat. So I don't know if she would like to add something to the discussion, because she was saying something about Chris Chittum being correct about the city's working on landlords. Stephanie, did you have anything to add? She may have stepped away. She just put her comment in just a moment ago.
While we're waiting for her to speak, I did just want to say, I was looking at the chat. Eric has a much better word for it. It's not just investment companies in general, but vulture capitalists is a good term for these entities.
It's the right term. And just the right of first refusals are brilliant if properly implemented. So for example, low-income housing tax credit program, I won't bore you, but in the 15-year compliance, there's a right of first refusal for the nonprofit or the local government to keep it. And then there's another 30 to 60-year compliance period. Right of first refusal is never going, not never. It is unlikely to work for mobile home renters in particular. Massey Mobile Homes down here in Christiansburg was bought 2 years ago for 17.5, but I round up, $16 million. It's not worth 7.2, period, in a sentence, by Alden Capital doing business through Homes of America. Go find the class action in West Virginia. The only thing that's going to change this outcome for the people who are most at risk in our communities are legal action or legislative action. And I don't see a hell of a lot of legislative action coming out of anybody. So you're left with your lowest paid lawyers in the state, your public defenders and your legal aid, the people who should be paid more than anyone else because they do the Lord's work, trying to put together enough money and pro bono to defend the most vulnerable. And look, I'm a landlord attorney. I get paid a lot better than they do. So I'm a hypocrite for saying that. But those are the people who are taking care of these people. You want to support them, support legal aid. You want to support them, support legislative change. Side with Isabel. Take all of her provisions. Face that. That's what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the only ones who sue me, by the way, legal aid, my best friends. Roanoke has an amazing legal aid team. Mona Raza is just taking over the helm from David. Wonderful human beings. Roanoke is caring. It tries. It's trying to do a lot of things. But it can't stop a mobile home provider or a affordable Section 8 provider from selling out to a $20 million bid offer And
Yeah.
then what they'll do, they'll run it out for 3 years, raise the rent, run everybody out of it, and then redevelop the land because they've burnt out their statute of limitations and there's no enforcement. So, ta-da.
Yes.
I think our city council person is back with us, and I'm
I
going to.
am. Thank you so much. I wasn't expecting, excuse me, I wasn't expecting to talk or say anything, but I am a woman of words. I do always have something to say. I am interested in listening to, and Chris is right, we will be voting on the zoning amendments, the reforms in some of the single family residential districts. And I am very much interested in how that's going to come out. You know, you always get your pros and your cons on that. But I'm just pleased to hear more about protecting the least of these. When we look at, quote, affordable housing, and Chris know I've said this time and time again, I always say, what is affordable housing? There's that definition, and you hit it right on the head, Isabel, when I look at 80%, 60%. That's what I look at, that low income. I grew up in that phase years ago, so I understand it, and I'm always that advocate for the least of these. And I will continue to advocate for them. And I believe the city does have that in mind. And in fact, Chris and I talked about it today. We talked about that certain slum landlord type of thing. And I am trying to help Roanoke and advocate for that. Pushing for the least of these, those underserved. And what the gentleman said about the substandard homes that they are caused to live in. And I do want to reach back out to you, Isabel, and get more information on how I can continue to advocate for those residents in the city of Roanoke. So thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I was just going to say the fact that there are two city council members from Roanoke here wanting to talk about affordable housing just really makes me super happy. And I'm really excited to meet you all and would love to chat offline as well about some of these things. So thank you so much.
Just a correction, Chris is not a council person.
Oh,
He's a city employee.
Chris, she's giving you a new job.
Oh, okay.
Another job.
I work for Stephanie. So.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yes. Chris is being shy, and I want to interject this. Chris has almost 30 years of service with the city of Roanoke. So he definitely knows his craft. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Well,
Thank you both.
on behalf of Justice Advocates, I want to thank Isabel for her contributions tonight and for all the work that she does, and all the other speakers we've had in this series. We ask a lot of them to condense their lives and their passions to 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and it's impossible, but we truly do appreciate your gifts tonight. And if you're like me and this is all so overwhelming, but still so important to you, I encourage you to sign up for those action alerts with Virginia Housing Alliance. It's a great way to be engaged in advocating and trusting the people who know what they're talking about to lead the way. And I'm going to call now on Mark Benson, who's going to close us up tonight. And you'll note some things that I put in the chat. Those relate to some things Mark is going to share with you momentarily.
I will also add, we need to show up at 2:00 on Monday, city council.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Sorry.
I don't want you going there at the wrong time, Jenny.
Mark, would you close us out?
Is he there? Here he is.
Mark, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm happy to close, and I am happy to talk about the upcoming events. First one is on April 1st. Sam Rasool is going to be visiting us and telling us about things that have happened in the session. From his point of view, we had an excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Isabel McLain, for your presentation tonight about housing. And Sam will probably be covering a bill that he had on prison communications and education and other topics that are important to our community. There is a poll that we are going to be sending, so be on the lookout for that. It's about the future events that Justice Advocate might put on. And feel free at any point to send us an email. We enjoy communication back and forth. And so feel free to make use of that. That's on the screen, but also in the chat that Nancy sent just a few minutes ago. So thank you for that. And there are some other events that are coming up by other organizations locally here. Virginia Organizing has a rally for housing on March 15th, Friday, and it's at 12:30 at South Main Kroger. That should be a good event, a fun event to see the solidarity around that as well. They also have a monthly Zoom. Next one is on Mondays. They do that on Mondays, the fourth Monday of the month, 6 o'clock. Ask Cleo for how to get on the link to that Zoom. And Pulaski County Free Store and Power are putting on a mutual aid presentation. It's a Zoom, and it's on March 21st. And the links to register for that and more information about that are in the chat as well. And then the final one is the Montgomery County Community Review Council, along with the Christiansburg Institute, is doing their second in the speaker series. And this promises to be another really great presentation. They're doing it at the Lyric Theater, and it's on reclaiming history through preservation and genealogy. So thank you very much to each of you tonight, and to Isabel McLain in particular for joining us and for making a difference in the issues. The importance of housing, the inequities in those are going to stay with us, and together we can make a meaningful impact. Thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to your continued collaboration. And goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again.